Hi everyone. I want to take a few minutes today to talk to you about the nature versus nurture debate in a really interesting way in which that debate has been changing in recent years. Now, most of you guys are going to be familiar with, or at least have heard of, the nature versus nurture debate, something that really underlies the chapter on development. The nature versus nurture debate is several thousand years old. Guys as old as Plato and Aristotle argued about whether something was an inherent quality, if it was in our nature, built into us from the very beginning, or if it's a result of environmental influences, our nurture, something that came from the world around us. Now, these days, we tend to say that the nature versus nurture debate is dead. Mostly because we now know that almost everything about you is a result of both your nature, now what we know as genetics, or nurture, the environment. That both of these factors come into play when it comes to looking at what makes you you. And that in reality, trying to figure out what part of this is nature and which part is nurture, it's just too complicated. Now, as if that story weren't complicated enough, our standard understanding of genetics and the environment and how they work has really been changing in recent years. See, our traditional perspective is that you get your genes from your parents. If your parents had good genes and they survived and were able to find a mate, then you get those genes. They're good. They're a good fit for the environment. And some of these genes program in qualities, things like eye color and hair color. Now, genes can do more than just program in things like hair color and eye color. They can also influence you in smaller ways, make you more likely to be tall or short, to be heavy or skinny. And they can also affect how susceptible you are to certain diseases like heart disease and cancer and even psychological disorders. Many of these disorders have a really strong, what we call, familial component. At the same time, though, we do know that the environment comes into play, that just because you have genes that make you more likely to develop a disorder, this doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to develop it. They both act as risk factors. Now, traditionally, the way we've seen it is that your genes you get from your parents, they put you at risk, and then you may or may not develop a disorder. And when it comes time for you to have your own children, those children will receive genes from you and your significant other, their other parent, their other biological parent. But the choices you make, the environment that you're influenced by, these things that make you you, your experiences, your children don't get the benefit or the cost of those. But 10 years ago, a researcher named Michael Meany accidentally came across something fascinating. He was working with rats in a laboratory. Now, many rats that you find in a laboratory are clones. They all have exactly the same genetics. And he wanted to look at these different rats and figure out what it was that made some rats good parents and other rats, well, not so great parents. You see, some rat moms are really good moms. They pay a lot of attention to their babies. They lick them, they groom them, they make sure they're really clean and warm and comfortable. And the other moms are, well, kind of crummy. It's kind of like they're too busy doing whatever else it is rats do to spend time taking care of their children. Now, you're probably not surprised to find out that good mothers produce good mothers, that the babies of good rat moms tend to lick and groom their babies a lot, and the babies of kind of crummy rat moms tend to kind of ignore their parents. Not a big surprise there. But if you take a good rat mom who's the product of a good rat mom, you let her grow up, and then as soon as she has babies, you take those babies before they've ever had any interaction with their mothers, and you immediately put them in the care of a bad mom, they don't end up being crummy moms. They stay good moms. So even though they have the same genes as both moms, even though they were exposed to crummy parenting, they don't turn out bad, they turn out good, almost as if they got the benefit of their mom's good parenting. After this, or really long before it, there was a village in northern Sweden that kept really immaculate records of everything that happened, who was born there, who died there, what their jobs were like, what their names were, what they did throughout their lives, what they looked like, and who they married. Almost as important, they kept track of crops and the crop yields. When were crops good? When were crops bad? When was fishing good and when was fishing bad? When were there times of plenty and times of famine? Researchers recently, looking back through these books, looking back through these records, found that in times of famine, people would of course pass, and some people would end up very nearly dying due to starvation. And they found that men who were exposed to famine between the ages of 9 and 12, if you look not at them or even at their children, but instead at their grandchildren, you find that these grandchildren are protected against things like heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. Which is kind of odd, because it's almost as if they benefited from their grandfathers going through a time of famine. Even more recently, in the last year and a half, researchers looked at the children and grandchildren of survivors of the Holocaust, a time when Jews in Europe were not just discriminated against, but killed and placed in concentration or death camps. Survivors of these concentration camps, of this incredibly traumatic experience, produced children and grandchildren who, regardless of whether or not they knew their biological parents and grandparents, were at risk for things like post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, and mood disorders. Almost as if they ended up at risk for these things, not because of their own experiences, but because of the experience of their parents and their grandparents. All of these data, all of these stories seem to point at the possibility that if you go through some sort of experience, it affects not just you, but also your children and grandchildren, a theory that has been laughed at by biologists for decades, for centuries. But as it turns out, when you get genes from your parents, you don't just get those genes, you also get the machinery for decoding those genes, for turning those genes into who you are. And that machinery for decoding those genes can be affected by your experiences, by your environment. We now see that who you are isn't just a result of this code that sits within every single cell of your body. It's a result of how this code is read, interpreted, decoded, and then used to construct you. And if the way that it's read and decoded and interpreted and constructed is affected by experiences, then you can very nearly inherit the experiences of your parents and of your grandparents. This means that as you're making choices that affect how healthy or happy you are, you're also inadvertently affecting how healthy and happy your children are. This explains a lot of things, everything from how mental illness can run in families when it didn't seem to appear early on, all the way down to the fact that people who experience obesity and diabetes, even if they lose their weight before they have children, are at risk for having children who themselves experience obesity and diabetes. So, just another really interesting thing happening in the field, not just of psychology, but also in biology and genetics. I'll see you guys soon for another update on personality. Hope you found this one interesting. Bye.
Hey guys, one last point before I let you go. I was cutting together the video to post up on YouTube when I realized that I left out the most important part, what in the world this title means and what it has to do with anything. Turns out this whole field, this study of us inheriting our parents' experiences and grandparents' experiences, is called epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of the epigenome, that machinery that's built all around your DNA that affects the way it's read, interpreted, and constructed into you, how it hides certain genes and activates or turns on others. So that's what the title Epigenetics is. It's what this whole thing is about. See you next time.